Imagine walking through a quiet forest. Birds fill the air with their songs. The soft earth yields beneath your steps. Suddenly, you stumble and notice that something has slipped from your pocket. A small, gleaming stone you picked up minutes earlier. It's nothing valuable, nothing essential, and yet a strange discomfort settles in. A sense of loss that feels larger than it should. Rationally, you know it doesn't matter, but still, you feel as though you've lost something important. This discomfort is the silent echo of a deeply human phenomenon, loss aversion, clearly articulated by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, two giants of cognitive psychology. Loss aversion describes our tendency to feel the pain of loss far more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. In their research and experiments, a stark truth emerged. Losing $100 hurts more than gaining $100 feels good. And this emotional asymmetry, seemingly simple, shapes financial decisions, political choices, personal relationships, and even the direction of entire lives. The paradox arises because, if we were perfectly rational beings, we would treat gains and losses symmetrically, guided purely by the logic of objective value. Gaining $100 should feel exactly as good as losing $100 feels bad, just in opposite directions. But we are not cold creatures of calculation. We are beings of flesh, history, and fear. Kahneman and Tversky quantified this distortion in what became known as prospect theory, demonstrating that for most people, the pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. This means that when faced with a fair gamble, equal chances to win or lose, most of us hesitate, preferring to cling to what we already have, to protect what we've already secured. We favor the security of the known over the uncertain promise of growth. This impact stretches far beyond gambling tables. Think of an investor who holds on to falling stocks, hoping they will rebound, reluctant to realize the loss. Or a voter who continues supporting a failing leader to avoid admitting their initial judgment was wrong. Think of relationships prolonged far past their natural life out of fear of the emptiness that might follow. In all these cases, loss aversion chains us to what has been, even when the future calls for change. Nietzsche, in his philosophy, touched on a similar idea when he spoke of the human difficulty in killing their own gods, in abandoning beliefs that once gave life meaning. Every renunciation feels like a small death. Wittgenstein, too, with his famous assertion that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world, hinted at this realm. To abandon a language, a way of thinking, is to suffer a loss as real as the loss of any tangible object. Curiously, loss aversion may have been adaptive. In hostile environments, avoiding loss could mean the difference between life and death. Yet in today's world, where innovation, adaptation, and flexibility are more valuable than mere survival, it often traps us in comfort zones that, quietly, become cages. There is also a profound moral dimension. Our loss aversion makes us susceptible to manipulation. Governments, advertisers, religious institutions, all instinctively or deliberately know that threatening the loss of something already ours is far more powerful than promising a new gain. Just look at political campaigns that warn of what you might lose, rather than boasting about what you could gain. Recognizing this tendency within ourselves doesn't free us from it, but it may make us slightly more aware. And in awareness, there is always a crack through which choice can enter. In the end, loss aversion reveals something essential about our condition. The sense that what we possess, our belongings, our relationships, our identities, is fragile, always perched on the edge of disappearance. We live caught between the desire to grow and the fear of losing, between the hope for something new and the nostalgia for what once was. Perhaps the real challenge is not to eliminate loss aversion, but to learn to live alongside it, like an anxious old friend. To know that it will whisper in our ears whenever change approaches, whenever life demands a leap, and yet to decide, with trembling hands, a tight chest, but open eyes, to make the crossing anyway, because ultimately, loss is inevitable. What truly defines us is what we choose to lose. Imagine sitting in a quiet room, the faint hum of a fluorescent light above your head. A doctor hands you a small white pill, assuring you it will ease your pain. You swallow it, feeling a subtle shift inside you, not immediate, but undeniable. Minutes pass, and somehow the pain that once gnawed at your body begins to retreat. You smile, relieved. Only later do you learn. The pill contained no active substance at all, nothing but sugar. This silent, invisible force that changed your experience is known as the placebo effect, a paradox where belief alone seems to summon real healing. The placebo effect exposes a remarkable tension at the heart of human existence. The boundary between mind and body is far less rigid than we once believed. In medicine, we expect treatment to work because of chemical reactions, biological mechanisms, verifiable causes. And yet, again and again, research shows that expectation, hope, and belief themselves can trigger measurable improvements, not only in pain, but in symptoms ranging from depression to Parkinson's disease. The paradox is striking. How can something inert, a substance with no therapeutic properties, cause real physiological change? How can the intangible architecture of belief alter the very fabric of the physical body? Scientific studies have explored these mysteries in depth. In experiments dating back to the 1950s, patients who received sham surgeries or sugar pills reported dramatic recoveries, often indistinguishable from those of patients receiving real treatments. Brain scans now show that placebos can stimulate the release of endorphins, dopamine, and other neurotransmitters. It's not just in your head, it is in your blood, your nerves, your very cells. Philosophically, the placebo effect challenges the strict materialist view that reality is entirely external and objective. Thinkers like William James, who emphasized the power of belief in shaping experience, and Ludwig Wittgenstein, who questioned the separation between inner states and outward behavior, might recognize in the placebo effect a profound lesson, that consciousness is not a passive mirror of the world, but an active participant in it. Yet the placebo effect also raises uncomfortable questions. If belief can heal, can it also harm? The nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo, shows that negative expectations can worsen symptoms, even create illness. A patient convinced that a harmless procedure will cause pain may indeed feel agony. Fear, like hope, carves its signature into flesh. In a broader sense, the placebo effect reveals how much of human life operates on faith, ritual, and narrative. Medical settings, with their white coats and sterile rooms, their careful language and gestures, act as stages upon which the drama of healing is performed. The placebo does not function in isolation. It draws its power from the entire context surrounding it. Without the trust in the doctor, the ritual of the consultation, the cultural script that tells us this is medicine, the sugar pill would remain just that, sugar. This realization extends beyond medicine. In economics, in education, in politics, belief often precedes and shapes reality. People invest in markets because they believe they will grow. Students perform better when they believe in their potential. Societies endure or collapse based not only on material conditions, but on the invisible scaffolding of collective expectation. Ultimately, the placebo effect teaches us a humbling lesson. We are not merely objects moving through a world of causes and effects. We are also subjects, weaving meaning, expectation, and hope into the fabric of reality itself. Perhaps the real power of the placebo lies not in trickery, but in the reminder that within each of us there exists a capacity to influence our own well-being, not through denial of science, but through a fuller embrace of what it means to be human. To heal is not only to fix a broken machine, it is to awaken an inner force that believes healing is possible. And so, the next time a simple gesture, a kind word, a symbolic act, a small white pill, brings comfort beyond reason, we might remember. Sometimes, belief itself is the medicine. Picture standing at the edge of a dense fog. Shapes emerge, twist, and vanish, refusing to form into anything solid. You step forward, desperate for a path, a sign, a fixed point to orient yourself. The longer you wander, the more the uncertainty gnaws at you, until any clear answer, any structure, even a fragile one, feels better than the endless unknown. This inner drive, this craving for certainty, is known as the need for closure. First articulated by psychologist Ari Kruglansky, the need for closure refers to our desire for a firm answer to a question, any answer, rather than enduring ambiguity and confusion. It is a universal human impulse, emerging especially strongly in times of stress, anxiety, or threat. In moments of instability, the mind rushes to grasp at certainties, to settle the unbearable weight of not knowing. At its core, the need for closure is a paradox. Certainty soothes, but it can also blind. The very mechanisms that bring relief from chaos can trap us in rigid beliefs, hasty judgments, and false understandings. In our rush to close the gap, we may choose the wrong path simply because it offers the illusion of solidity. Psychological studies show that individuals high in need for closure tend to seize quickly on initial information and resist revising their judgments even when faced with new evidence. They prefer order over ambiguity, predictability over complexity. In social contexts, this can manifest as stereotyping, prejudice, and dogmatism, not out of malice, but from a deep-seated discomfort with the unsettled and the uncertain. Philosophers have long grappled with this tension. Søren Kierkegaard described the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo we experience when confronted with the open possibilities of existence. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the human tendency to flee from the burden of radical freedom into self-deception and rigid roles. Both recognize that ambiguity is not a flaw to be eradicated, but an inherent part of being. In science, the need for closure can both drive and distort inquiry. The relentless pursuit of answers fuels discovery, but an impatience for definitive results can lead to premature conclusions, suppression of dissenting voices, or clinging to outdated theories long after evidence demands change. Karl Popper warned against the temptation to seek final truths, proposing instead the idea of falsifiability, that scientific theories must always remain open to revision, never fully closed. Culturally, the need for closure helps explain why myths, conspiracy theories, and simplistic narratives flourish, especially during turbulent times. When the world feels incomprehensible, stories that offer clear villains and heroes, simple causes and effects, become profoundly attractive. Complexity, nuance, and uncertainty require cognitive and emotional resilience, qualities not evenly distributed or easily summoned under pressure. But to live authentically, to think critically, is to resist the easy comforts of closure. It is to linger in the fog longer than feels natural, to endure the discomfort of not knowing, to allow truths to emerge slowly, incompletely, and sometimes painfully. This does not mean abandoning all judgment or living in perpetual indecision. It means cultivating a different kind of certainty, one not based on fixed answers, but on a deep confidence in our ability to navigate uncertainty itself, a trust not in particular conclusions, but in the processes of inquiry, reflection, and revision. In the end, the need for closure reflects both a strength and a vulnerability. It reveals our hunger for meaning, our yearning for coherence in a world that often defies it, but it also warns us that sometimes the answers that come quickest are the ones that mislead us most. Perhaps the challenge is not to abolish the need for closure, but to transform it, to seek not premature endings, but deeper understandings, to learn to stand a little longer in the fog, to listen a little more carefully to the silence, and to allow ourselves the grace of not always knowing. Because in that open space of uncertainty, where answers are not rushed and judgments not hardened, true wisdom has room to grow. Imagine standing at the edge of a bustling square. A crowd gathers in the center, faces turned in the same direction, voices swelling in a single chant. You hesitate at first, unsure of what they are chanting for or against, but as the wave of energy rolls over you, a strange pull tugs at your chest. Instinctively, you feel the urge to move closer, to join in, even before fully understanding why. This silent, almost invisible force is the essence of the bandwagon effect, and when deliberately manipulated, it becomes one of the most potent tools of influence. The bandwagon effect describes the psychological phenomenon where people adopt beliefs, behaviors, or trends simply because others are doing the same. Rooted deeply in our evolutionary past, this instinct to align with the group once served vital purposes: safety, belonging, survival. Alone, an individual is vulnerable. Together, a group becomes strong. Our brains are wired to read the movements of the herd as cues for what is right, safe, or successful. But when this natural inclination is weaponized, the result is manipulation on a massive scale. Marketers, politicians, media outlets, all have long understood how to exploit the bandwagon effect. By creating the illusion that everyone is doing it, or everyone believes it, they trigger a psychological shortcut. If many are convinced, it must be good. If many are buying, it must be worth buying. If many are shouting, it must be true. The actual content often matters less than the visible momentum. Edward Bernays, the father of public relations and a keen student of Freud's theories, famously used these techniques to shape public opinion. He orchestrated public spectacles where hired actors would adopt certain behaviors, creating a visual narrative that suggested a groundswell of popular support. From fashion trends to political ideologies, Bernays demonstrated that perception of popularity could be manufactured, and that once the illusion was in place, real masses would follow. Philosophers like Hannah Arendt warned of the dangers lurking within these collective movements. In her analysis of totalitarian regimes, she observed how isolated individuals, desperate for connection and clarity in chaotic times, became fertile ground for mass ideologies. When belonging is scarce, even the most destructive groups can offer the irresistible warmth of shared purpose. The manipulation of the bandwagon effect also explains much about modern digital culture. Social media platforms, with their likes, shares, retweets, and trending lists, are finely tuned engines for amplifying herd behavior. Algorithms prioritize content that already shows signs of popularity, regardless of its truthfulness or depth. In such an environment, the loudest and most immediate wins, not necessarily the most thoughtful or the most just. At its worst, bandwagon manipulation can lead to moral blindness, mass hysteria, scapegoating, suppression of dissent. History is filled with examples where entire societies, swept up in collective momentum, abandoned reason and compassion in favor of conformity and belonging. Yet, like all psychological forces, the bandwagon effect is not inherently evil. It can foster positive social change when aligned with ethical aims, such as normalizing seatbelt use, encouraging recycling, or supporting human rights movements. The same energy that can be manipulated for control can also be harnessed for solidarity and progress. The real danger lies in unconscious participation. When we move with the crowd without reflection, when we mistake popularity for truth, we surrender the most essential aspect of our humanity, the capacity for independent judgment. To resist the manipulation of the bandwagon effect requires a kind of inner vigilance, a deliberate slowing down, a willingness to ask, why am I drawn to this? What do I know beyond the chorus of voices? Would I still choose this path if I stood alone? Because true freedom is not found in endless contrarianism or blind opposition to the group. It is found in the quiet, careful space where we can hear both the roar of the crowd and the still, small voice of our own reason, and know when to follow and when to step away. In a world where the bandwagon rolls faster than ever, the challenge is not merely to avoid it, but to recognize when it carries us toward our better selves, and when it speeds blindly toward a cliff. Imagine walking through a crowded marketplace, vibrant with colors, voices, and movement. Around you, countless masks are for sale. Smiling faces, stern gazes, glittering visages of confidence and success. As you browse, you feel an unspoken pressure to choose one, to place it carefully over your own features, to step into a role that others will recognize and admire. Before long, the mask feels natural, almost indistinguishable from your own skin. This quiet process, so gradual, so seductive, is the cultivation of a false identity. The phenomenon of false identity arises when the image we project outward becomes disconnected from our authentic self. Over time, we begin to believe in the performance, confusing the role we play with who we truly are. This is not simply deceit. Often, it is an unconscious adaptation to social expectations, a survival mechanism in a world that rewards appearances more than substance. Sociologist Irving Goffman explored this in The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, describing human interactions as performances, with individuals managing the impressions they give to others. We are actors on a stage, Goffman suggested, constantly adjusting our masks to fit the audience before us. In small ways, this is normal, even necessary. But when the mask hardens into our only face, we risk losing sight of the person underneath. Philosophers have long wrestled with the tension between being and seeming. In Being and Time, Martin Heidegger spoke of the danger of falling into the they, living according to the anonymous standards of society rather than from genuine personal conviction. Jean-Paul Sartre warned of bad faith, where individuals deceive themselves into believing they are merely the sum of their roles and obligations, avoiding the terrifying freedom of authentic choice. The cultivation of false identity is particularly intensified in the modern age. Social media platforms encourage the crafting of curated selves, idealized, polished, endlessly affirmed by likes and follows. Careers demand personal branding, Relationships reward performative happiness, and consumer culture whispers that who you are is defined by what you own, how you appear, how loudly you signal belonging to the right groups. Over time, this external validation can become addictive. The more we are rewarded for the mask, the more alien the true face beneath it feels. The authentic self, with its contradictions, vulnerabilities, and quiet depths, is gradually exiled. In its place stands a hollow figure, constantly scanning for approval, terrified of irrelevance, exhausted by the need to maintain the illusion. Yet the false identity is never truly secure. Deep down, a tension persists, a subtle sense of disconnection, of weariness, of being out of sync with oneself. Sometimes it surfaces as anxiety, sometimes as existential despair, sometimes simply as a vague longing for something real, though we cannot name it. This inner fracture can be dangerous, but it also carries the seed of awakening. To recognize the false identity is the first act of liberation. It requires the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Whose expectations am I living for? What parts of myself have I silenced to maintain this image? What am I afraid will happen if I remove the mask? The path back to authenticity is not about rejecting all social roles or withdrawing from the world. It is about realigning the outer expression with the inner truth, allowing the self we present to be rooted in who we genuinely are, not just in who we think we must be. True identity is not a fixed thing to be crafted. It is a living process to be discovered. It embraces complexity, imperfection, and change. It refuses to be confined to a static image, no matter how admired that image might be. In the end, cultivating a false identity may bring temporary comfort, fleeting admiration, and shallow belonging, but it will never bring peace. Peace comes only from the difficult, beautiful work of meeting ourselves without pretense and daring to show that self to the world. Because the greatest act of rebellion, in a world of endless masks, is to be seen as you truly are.